because I had a Jewish education and I held really closely to that. Since I went to Jewish school, I was also actually a staunch Zionist. I was super pro-Israel.
Assalamualaikum Sobat Almira. Datangnya hidayah pada seseorang tak bisa diduga-duga. Seorang wanita berlatar belakang keluarga Yahudi ini masuk Islam atas pertanyaan yang ia pikirkan selama ini. Berawal dari pertanyaan tentang sujud dan kenapa Islam melepas sepatu saat berdoa kepada Tuhannya. Hal sekilas itu terbenak di pikirannya. Wanita ini merupakan kelahiran Montreal, Kanada, namun keluarganya merupakan seorang Yahudi yang berasal dari komunitas Yahudi Hasidik. Meskipun dia berada di Kanada, keluarganya sangat memegang erat ajaran Yahudi dan dia pun mengaku sangat pro-Israel dan dia menyebut bahwa Israel adalah bangsanya.
I get asked a lot of how I converted to Islam, of course, as most viewers get this question. So in this video, I'll get into it. So, as I mentioned, I was born to a Jewish family. I was born in Montreal, Canada, to actually a Hasidic family. So, up until I was 3 or 4 years old, up until my parents' divorce, I was raised Hasidic. And afterwards, once my parents got divorced, my mother took me and my siblings out of the Hasidic community, but we still remained Jewish, of course, and we still remained in the Jewish community. So, just a little background, my father is Ashkenazi Jewish. He is from Eastern, his family comes from Eastern Europe, and my mother is Mizrahi and Sephardic. And that means her mother was born in Morocco and her father was born in Yemen, and my mother was actually born in occupied Palestine, or as Jewish people call it, Israel. So growing up, I always considered myself Israeli Jewish. I went to a Jewish school my whole life, obviously up until the end of high school. So at that point, I was super Jewish, believed in God. I always believed in God, but I believed in Judaism specifically. I believed in the Torah. I believed in the teachings of Judaism because I had a Jewish education and I held really closely to that. Since I went to Jewish school, I was also actually a staunch Zionist. I was super pro-Israel, and yeah, I held really closely to my religion and to, I guess, what I thought was my nationality, being Israeli. So my whole high school and elementary, I considered myself Jewish, and I practiced Judaism pretty religiously. My family, although they left the Hasidic community, we still remained like modern Orthodox or conservative, so we still dressed modestly, and we kept Shabbat, we kept all the holidays, we kept fully kosher, and I mean, we still do keep fully kosher in my family's home.
Dia mengaku bahwa perjalanannya menuju Islam tidak secara tiba-tiba, karena dia merupakan seorang Yahudi yang erat dengan melakukan kegiatan keagamaan Yahudi. Bahkan dia juga merupakan seorang pendukung keras Zionis dan Israel. Bermula ketika dia lulus SMA, dia mulai keluar dari komunitas Yahudi dan bertemu orang-orang non-Yahudi. Dia sering bertukar pendapat dengan orang-orang itu. Sejak itulah dia mulai meragukan Yahudi, bahkan dia mulai jarak diri dengan Yudaisme.
So yeah, it was only until I graduated high school, once I left, the Jewish community, I started realizing that a lot of things that Jewish people were doing didn't make sense to me. And I was like, So I started distancing myself away from Judaism. For example, I started like sneaking my phone on Shabbat, so I wasn't like keeping Shabbat fully like my family was. So I'd be in my bed under my covers because I shared a room with my sister, and I'd be on my phone. So it kind of started like that, and like I started having like a bit of doubt in my heart about like what I was practicing, and then I like basically started distancing myself from God. So I lived like that for a few months, but then at one point I was like, I feel like alienated from God. I feel like I need to become closer to God. I feel like I needed to mend my relationship with God because I was starting to feel, empty without God's presence in my life. So before going to school every day on the bus, I took a little Tehillim, which is a book of Psalms, which is written by the King David. And I started reading that, and I was like, you know what, hopefully that's going to, ignite my, my passion, my, like, in Arabic we say my iman, my faith. So I started reading that, and like it was really nice. It was a nice book, and I remember one thing in particular that I remember that kept reoccurring was how King David mentioned that he was prostrating in prayer to God. We prostrate in prayer to you, God. And it was mentioned over and over and over and over again. And that got me curious. I was like, why don't Jews prostrate during prayer? So I Googled it. I went to Chabad.org, blah, blah, blah. I did a lot of research, spoke to rabbis, but like, it still did not like satisfy me. All the responses I was getting were not satisfactory to me. So I was like, this is weird. So as I was doing a lot of research, at that same time, I didn't really have any Muslim friends. I had one Muslim friend, but she wasn't, we never spoke about religion, but I knew some like Muslim people online that I would sometimes speak to. And one time I had like a whole conversation with, like, it wasn't a friend, it was like a Muslim online friend that I never met. Actually, I never really met in real life. But anyways, we had a discussion and we were sending each other videos about like religion, and I saw this one video about like debates between Muslims and Jews, and I started realizing at that point that Islam and Judaism are so similar. It was also at that point that I realized that Jews and Muslims believe in the same God, and also Christians, but that's not really relevant to this story. But up till now, to this point, I basically thought that Muslims worshipped a different God. They worshipped Allah, which is a different God. I realized that Allah is actually just the name for God in Arabic, just like Dieu is Arabic and French. So I was like, okay, they believe in the Torah, they believe in the Gospels, they believe in all of the Jewish prophets that, Jews believe in. And the only thing that they believe in more is the Prophet Jesus and the Prophet Muhammad as the seal of the prophets, and the Quran as the word of God. So basically that's the only addition that it has to over Judaism. And I also, while I was Jewish, was like, oh yeah, Muslims stole our texts, they're just reusing, they're like copying our texts. That's really what I believed. And I realized that it wasn't copying Jewish texts, it was literally the same God. So God was continuing his message, it's the same message, and it just has, I guess, some like new information, some new tweaks. And I explained it to myself as like, it's like an update. People don't like when I use that term, but in my head I was like, it's like an update to Judaism. So at that point I was like, okay, it's not a whole different thing. And I decided to actually start looking to Islam. And also when I was thinking about, when I was reading the Tehillim and I realized that, he was saying, we prostrate in prayer to God, I did actually think of Muslims. So I was like, okay, that makes sense why Muslims pray to God. Pray to God, in like the way they do with like prostration, because that's what God wanted, that's what God says. And I also remember, how like Muslims pray without their shoes on, and I was like, that makes sense because a mosque is a holy ground. When you pray when you speak to God, you're speaking to someone so holy, so you have to respect them and take off your shoes. And I thought of, the time when Moses spoke to God and in the burning fire, the Snebo el Ba'esh. I'm not sure exactly what it's called in English, but it's like the fire, and God said, please take off your shoes to speak to me, to address me. And this was holy ground, so he had to take off his shoes. And I was like, that makes sense. And it was like little things like this. At this point, I still was not like actually considering being Muslim, but it was little things like that. It kept being added into like, I kept realizing that I was like, okay, Islam makes sense. This makes sense. Until one point I was like, you know what, I'll read the Quran. And I started reading the Quran, and the Quran made sense. And I was like, there's nothing wrong with it. It's perfect.
Sejak itulah dia memilih Islam karena Islam merupakan ajaran yang benar dan lebih masuk akal. Ketakjubannya terhadap Islam, bagaimana cara Muslim berdoa kepada Tuhan, takjub dengan isi Al-Quran, bahkan banyak sekali yang ia temukan kebenaran dalam Islam dan lebih masuk akal dibanding ajaran lain. Sobat Almira TV, itulah video kisah mualafnya seorang wanita Yahudi. Semoga ada manfaat dari video ini, dan bagi sobat semua, jangan lupa subscribe untuk mendapatkan video lainnya dari Almira TV. Sampai jumpa di video berikutnya. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.